Every revolution starts in the minds of the people.
Arm yourself for the war of ideas. Take back your life. Take back your liberty. Tom Mullen talks freedom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tom Mullen Talks Freedom. Today, my guest is Alan Mosely, a historian, jazz musician, writer, real libertarian, and most importantly, the host of It's Too Late with Alan Mosley. You might have caught my appearance on his show on Wednesday, and if you didn't, you should check out the show anyway. He's here to join me. We had so much to talk about, we thought we might have him back and just keep on going after Wednesday night. Alan, welcome to the show.
Tom, thanks for having me.
You guys do such a great job over there. How does one produce a libertarian late night talk show?
For me, the first thing was to start out with just your pretty typical red meat libertarian podcast and then get really bored and tired of that because after however many episodes we did in the course of a couple of years, you realize, and this is not to belittle the philosophy or what's going on in the world, because we did a lot of current events. We had a lot of guests on to talk about, hey, this just happened in the news. What do you think about this? But you reach a point where you realize you can only do so many episodes on inflation. You can only do so many episodes on price gouging. You can only do so many episodes on Abraham Lincoln before you realize we've done that and it's time to move on. And for me, it was, I'm getting bored, and if I'm going to do this, I got to have a good time. And I enjoyed the late night genre, but I also realized that if we're going to pivot to having a little bit more entertainment, have on a wider variety of guests perhaps, maybe have some music, maybe do some comedy, different things, is we really need to drop that L word. Libertarian. Just cut all that stuff out of all the branding, remove it from all the descriptions, and instead of worrying about being a libertarian podcast, be a late night TV show that just so happens to be hosted by a libertarian.
You wouldn't believe this, Alan, but even without mentioning the word, it came across somewhat libertarian, at least when I was on there and when I've watched before. I saw that you're a musician and a jazz musician, so I guess that means you're probably a real musician, unlike the host of this show. I meant to ask you the other night, is that music that I hear at the beginning of the show, is that your own or one of your favorite artists?
The intro video, that wasn't my music. That was music that we had made for the show, and to be honest, I wasn't even sold on it, actually. It's one of those things where we used it because we felt like it fit, but I was on the fence. But then once you're in it, you can't change. Like once that becomes synonymous with the starting of the show, then if you change it, then people get weird and they say, oh, something's different. I don't like this. I don't like change. And so it's sort of stuck. But there has been music on the show before that was performances by me. And I have on the same channel done some music performances. Ironically, as a side note for that, you would think with all the starving artists out there and all the people that are dying to get seen and get heard, and especially in the last few years, people sitting at home with their home studios or their guitars just collecting dust because they don't have anywhere to go. We had actually put out a lot of feelers saying, hey, are you an artist? Are you a musician? Are you a comedian? Why don't you send us a type 5? Why don't you send us a song? We'll have it as our musical guest or performance guest on the show. And you might be surprised to learn we had incredibly few people.
Yeah, I am surprised because everybody wants their music out there. At least for the first 100 years of my life, I'd play anywhere or send my song anywhere anybody would want it. But, and I remember that, I think it was your 100th episode that I saw. I know you said that you have a live episode with live guests every 50 episodes, and otherwise you do guests like most of us do. Who was the band that you had for the 100th episode?
So for the 100th episode, we had a band out of Lexington, Kentucky, that was JD and the Blues Machine. And they were a group of young guys that predominantly played blues rock, really talented guys, and they were up for the challenge. So when I had talked to them, I'd said, hey guys, I might not be on NBC or CBS, but we do this like a late night show. So if you've ever watched The Tonight Show or The Late Show, that they've got the house band, and when they're going to commercial break, the band strikes up a song and they're playing as we come back in from the break and all that. And I said, so you guys are going to have to come prepare to play us in and out of all the breaks and in between all the transitions. And then you'll also be our musical guest, and I'll just turn it over to you guys and you'll wrap up the show. And they were. So they're young guys and they were really excited to do it because it's an interesting setup to do it that way, to be the house band, then also be the musical guest for a program. And that actually was one of our most watched episodes as well. So I hope that really worked out for them. I'm not one of these people that just has people on for my own numbers or my own vanity. I genuinely hope that when people come on, they really get something tangible out of it. So I hope they did.
Yeah, it was a great band. And I should tell the listeners, if you haven't checked out this show, you're going to be surprised when you turn it on. It's like watching an NBC or CBS late night television show, just without all the woke nonsense, basically, and without the overbearing discussion of the non-aggression principle with every guest who comes on. I was just on your show the other day, and maybe I didn't mention the non-aggression principle, but I was probably too political. But what other kinds of guests have you had on recently? What could people expect to see when they tune in?
Sure. So just really quickly, I just want to remind you that when you were on the show, the one question I didn't ask you, because I will never ask anyone, and I openly mock hosts who ask me, is how did you find liberty? That's the worst. That's the way to turn the podcast off. But anyway, we've had New York Times bestselling authors, a present company included. We've had Tom Woods, of course, on the show. We've had historians like Kevin Gutzman. We've had educational experts like Carrie McDonald, Connor. We've had the great former Congressman Ron Paul has been on the program before. Jeffrey Tucker has been on the show. The great Lou Rockwell, founder of the Mises Institute, has been on the program. Economists like Walter Block and Gene Epstein have been on the show before. We really ran the gamut of Scott Horton, a foreign policy expert. Scott Horton's been on the show multiple times. Recently, we had Pete on for his, I think, third or fourth appearance. And then a lot of our mutual friends like Michael Bolden, Mike Meharry of the 10th Amendment Center. We've really run the gamut of a lot of the usual suspects in the liberty community. But we also are always on the lookout for spreading out from that, because I feel like for anyone who's watched a late night show, you know how the genre works, is that you have your first half of the show, which is really more of a performance, and then you have your second half of the show, which is your guests and your performers who come on opposite of your hosts and your producers to talk about what they're doing, talk about what's going on in the world. And that helped to make it fresh for me. So instead of us just sitting here and talking for 4 hours about how we would fix Syria if we were president, we separated into, here's an entertainment portion of the show, and then here's perhaps somebody we want to showcase. But I do have to say it again, along the same line as with the musicians and the comedians and trying to get those people to come on. It's a bit of a challenge to transition in our community. I love our community. I'm very pleased to have made a lot of great friends and a lot of great connections over the last several years of having done the show. But I'm going to be honest here and say there's a lot of humorless folks in the liberty community. They live in that eternal agony of knowing that we don't live in a free society. And there's folks out there that believe that as long as the world's not completely free, then you just can't enjoy anything in life. And what that unfortunately means is that then it becomes a limited type of guest who can appear on a show like mine, because frankly, I don't want a guest every week who's going to come on and preach doom and gloom. I want guests to come on and just talk about what's going on in their world. It doesn't have to be anything about politics. It can just be fun projects that you might have lined up or some interesting things you've seen on TV lately. And you'll just have to ignore those tweets and comments at the bottom of your screen that say, but what does this have to do about libertarianism?
Yeah, I think back, and I'm really going to date myself, because I remember when Letterman was doing stuff like the Velcro and the Alka-Seltzer suit. I don't know if that's before your time or not, but he would jump off a trampoline and get stuck to the wall and stuff like that. And I don't know what that has to do with inflation or the non-aggression principle, but it was sure entertaining. And I'd love to see stuff like that again. That's one of the things that our criticism of the left is that they're not funny anymore. Saturday Night Live was always funny and nobody was safe. Left, right, center, whatever. They were going after you. And I shared a spot from right after the financial crash. And I can't remember the actors playing the characters, but someone was on there playing Pelosi and someone was playing Barney Frank. And there was a guy doing Bush that was just hilarious. He had that squinty eye, facial expression down and everything. And it was just hilarious. And I'm sure I don't agree with anybody on that stage as far as politics go, but boy, they could really do their jobs. And we got to make sure that we don't become those people just wagging our fingers and people are like, okay, I agree with that, but I want to go watch some baseball now or something, or football. I think there's a whole thing about football now with their political bent, but you and I still watch it.
Yeah, exactly. If all we did was keep a list of all the actors, all the athletes, all the organizations that had contracts with the federal government who were sponsors of foreign entities that we didn't like or who had promoted the content of people we didn't like, if you did that, you would quickly find that there's basically nothing to consider, or people who are guilty by association. To your point about Saturday Night Live, is I feel like the disconnect there is when you had a left liberal Hollywood entertainment associations, etc., that felt like they were speaking truth to power when they themselves were not in power, then they hit all the right notes. But as I'm sure our criticisms of both media, tech, journalists, and Hollywood, if you consider yourself to be speaking truth to power today, and your truth just so happens to be the company line of the regime and big pharma, then that's not speaking truth to power. It's right. The way when we wax philosophical with our rosy colored glasses on about some of the people who influenced us that were brave and courageous and said and did things, even if they were just a comedian and made jokes, but they were making jokes of powerful people. When you're doing that of people in the highest seats of authority, then you truly are brave and courageous. But also, by the way, it should be funny. It's not good enough to just, there's an old Norm Macdonald who passed not that long ago, who I loved. He had a great quote about this, is that the worst thing about entertainers today is that they're trying to get claps, not laughs. It's easy for someone like a Bill Maher, and he actually made fun of Dennis Miller too, and he's been around for a long time. The Jon Stewarts of the world, the Stephen Colberts, the Jimmy Kimmels, that they want to say something that gets the audience to nod and clap in approval. But that's not a comedian's job. Comedian's just supposed to make you laugh.
Yeah. I think I saw the same interview because he also said they want to be the smart guy. Like Bill Maher wants you to think he's smart, and Dennis Miller, he goes, I want to be the dumb guy because people think the dumb guy is funny. And of course, he's probably smarter than both of them, but he plays the role he plays because you're there to entertain people. So, yeah, I think I saw that one. What was coming to mind, this is probably not up your musical alley, I think I might have mentioned him on your show as well, is I discovered, so I started listening to Social Distortion in the late 80s, early 90s. Just loved them. I've always loved them. They don't have that many albums for that many years, but they have 5 or 6 or 7 that are just beginning to end for me are great. The last one they did was a little more bluesy, blues rock than their previous ones were all rockabilly with distortion. That's how I would describe it. And this one was a little bluesier, Machine Gun Blues and all that. But they have a song called Give Me the Sweet and Lowdown. And I had never seen the video. And this thing, YouTube's algorithm decided Tom should see this. And it served it up. And I swear, this is like a work of art. It's really the best music video I've ever seen. It doesn't follow the lyrics of the song exactly, but it tells this whole other story that's just really moving. And I'm sitting there thinking, this guy is, he's a lefty. He's, racism, blah, blah, blah. But boy, what an artist. And yeah, that's what you have to do. I think a lot of libertarians too, like George Carlin, and they just look past for some reason, just for him, that he was very anti-business. And I don't mean corporatist. I don't mean, he was just anti-business, period, even if you do it the right way. So, okay, but he's still really funny, and he still does say a lot of good things. And I'm just so glad I got to see him live before he passed away. I got to see him in the early 90s, I think. But who are your comedic influences besides McDonald?
Specifically for the late night genre, my absolute favorite late night host of the really big ones over the last several decades, I liked in the war between Letterman and Leno. I was definitely a David Letterman guy. I actually don't even understand how people can like Jay Leno, to be honest with you. But
we got to talk about that. But go ahead.
Yeah, I was a Letterman guy, but in terms of how I emulate my program is Craig Ferguson. So Craig Ferguson, who was the Scottish guy who had the Late Show after Letterman for however many years he did it, and he finally retired, and he was replaced by the British fellow that they have now that I can't even remember his name off the top of my head. He's just so cringe and terrible. But Ferguson was great because he was not exactly the polished late night type genre that you would expect. And instead of trying to become that, he worked to deconstruct the whole platform. He had a late night show, but he didn't really do it quite like anybody else. And finally, when he got a sidekick, he didn't go out and get someone like Ed McMahon. He got a voice actor named Josh Robert Thompson who sat backstage, and he was voicing a skeleton robot, a gay skeleton robot named Jeff Peterson, and it was being voiced by Scott Robert Thompson backstage. And they also had Secretariat, the horse, but of course it was just two people in a horse costume. And if you'd never seen the show before and you're hearing this explanation right now, you're thinking, I can't visualize, what are you talking about? I can't visualize what this is. And the answer is that it was a late night show. It was still a guy sitting at a desk with a couple of ferns behind him in a faux stage, similar to the one behind me right now, with his sidekick off to one side and his fake horse off to the other side. And it was, but the formula was still there. You still have your monologue and then a break. And then you have your desk one, which is maybe you're answering some tweets and emails. Maybe you're doing something with the audience. Maybe you're telling an anecdote. And then after that segment's done, now you're on to, we're going to talk to our celebrity guests. But the beautiful thing about that is bringing on the celebrity guests to talk to them about whatever movie they're plugging. That was the worst part of the show. Nobody, it's easy to say, I don't really care to watch Leno. I'm just going to watch it because my favorite, performer is on and I want to see their gig. I've stayed up before and watched a show I didn't care to watch because I was just staying up to see someone I liked to perform. But when you're watching Ferguson, I just watch the first 30 minutes and turn it off because I don't really care what Halle Berry or Tom Cruise have to say about the environment. I just want to see Craig filling this character role. And it's basically like he's doing theater every single night. He's pretending to be a late night host. And I've told people that on my show, is that sometimes when people will watch the show and they'll be like, this isn't the Alan that I had envisioned, or I met Alan and this doesn't see anything like him. And as I tell them, well, because I'm playing the character of Alan Mosley, the late night talk show host, as opposed to Alan Mosley, the angry, bitter, cynical libertarian who hates the government.
When you mentioned Jay Leno, okay, so I thought I was alone in the world on this, and I don't know anything about comedy. I know what I like, and it's not that. But here's what I see when I see Leno. I mean, I know other people write the jokes, same thing for Letterman, but he doesn't seem to be able to deliver one. He doesn't seem to have the timing. And he keeps doing this thing all the time where he'd deliver the punchline and then he would say it again and just suck all the life out of it. How does he hit you? Am I onto something here? You must know more about this than I do.
So when they brought on, for people who are old enough, they remember the whole controversy of, it's always presumed that whoever has the late night is going to get the Tonight Show, and that was David Letterman, but he didn't get it when Carson retired. They gave it to Leno. And at the end, in hindsight now, we look back on it and we realize, instead of me judging and just saying that was stupid, Letterman was better, which I agree with, is try to understand why they made the decision they made. And why did they do it? Leno was the guy because he was safe. He was the guy that made all the celebrities feel good, that was good at flashing a fake smile and patting all the little celebrities on their head and say, yes, your movie won't tank at the box office. I'm sure it'll be great. And he would tell jokes, but they would be done in such a way that they wouldn't quite be risque or not enough. It was safe. General audiences could like it. But with someone like a David Letterman, and of course, you fast forward to now, and David Letterman is muted compared to some of the more shocking type comedy you have out there now. But compared to someone like a Jay Leno, Dave's a little bit rough around the edges. He's a little bit more likely to go off script. He's a little bit more likely to tell people what he really thinks about them. And that wasn't safe enough for NBC to give him the Tonight Show. Of course, he went to CBS and had an incredibly successful show for decades. So obviously, I somehow doubt that it would have worked out poorly if they'd gone with David Letterman, because he had a great career. But Letterman, again, compared to South Park, David Letterman is not controversial. But in the world of late night, where you had the Allens and the Carsons of the world, someone like a David Letterman coming on, and even if there's a 1% chance that he's going to look this random celebrity guest in the face and say, well, that sounds really stupid, who would want to watch that? They don't want that. They don't want that in safe network TV. And same thing, funny enough, Ferguson fell into the same identity as Letterman. Of course, he worked for Letterman. He was on the show after Letterman, in that Celebrities either really loved him or really hated him. And if you wonder how can that be, it's because the celebrities that actually have a brain, like they're capable of autonomous thought, they're self-aware and they can come on and talk about things other than the latest gag they did with Carrot Top. You know, those people loved Craig Ferguson because Craig Ferguson would talk to them like human beings. But you know what? The celebrities that came on with a little cue card that said, my agent said this is what we're talking about, and let's stick to the notes. Those people hated Craig Ferguson. And so Letterman was the earlier generation of that concept.
That makes so much sense. Believe it or not, I have never thought of it the way you just said it, because I was just mystified being at the time, I can't remember what decade this was, the 90s maybe, in my 20s or early 30s. It just seemed like a no-brainer. Well, Letterman's just so much better than this guy. But of course, if I'm their target audience, maybe a guy my age now is what they want. Maybe I think, I don't know about him, at least back then. I don't know if you remember, it was when he went to CBS soon after that, or maybe it was the first show. He had a 20th anniversary on late night or 25th anniversary, something like that. And he had all these people calling in. And he had Paul Newman with the fake guns. Do you remember that or no?
I vaguely remember that, yeah.
And I just remember that he had Osama bin Laden call in, which was really funny because they show bin Laden and they show his lips moving. And of course, they have a guy voicing him and he says, yes, David, I want to congratulate you on 25 years and late night and congratulations. And then stops when he goes, oh, and death to America.
Yeah. So I'll give you another small example that illustrates the dynamic perfectly. As you look at someone like Jimmy Kimmel. Now, Jimmy Kimmel wasn't always Jimmy Kimmel, right? He used to be on The Man Show. They used to have gags, let's get women with large bosoms to jump up and down on trampolines because that makes for good television. That's who Jimmy Kimmel was at one point in his career. He was closer to Johnny Knoxville than he was Jay Leno. I think that's very fair to say. Maybe I'm being too generous. But then you look at him now, he's the weaselly guy who breaks into tears every time someone says something bad about the regime and he feels the need to defend the party platform. And you're just, and the moral of the story being, so first of all, he's over there on ABC, so he's not exactly getting the Tonight Show. It's just, there are layers to this game. But even in that world, the Jimmy Kimmel that existed, the Jimmy Kimmel that was 28 would have never gotten a Jimmy Kimmel show on ABC. He only got that show because he proved that he could be Leno. Like, I'm sure if you talked to Leno in person, you would find him to be probably a personable and intelligent guy who's probably pretty funny and pretty quick on his feet. I don't think you get to be where he was in his career without having those qualities. But what he also proved more than Letterman is that he could smile and he could nod and he can do what he was told. And he could sign off on whatever the network said, and he could follow the rules and all those things that Letterman sometimes struggled to follow the rules. Kimmel started off in a career where you would think to yourself, there's just no way this guy is going to clean up and fly straight. But obviously, behind closed doors, unbeknownst to you and me, he clearly proved himself to the networks that I can play ball, I can be nice, I can do what I'm told, I can stay on script. And that's why he's now in prime time or in late night doing a talk show. But again, it always just circles back around to the Norm Macdonalds of the world are not getting those gigs. Not that he wouldn't necessarily want it, but they're not getting those gigs. And it's not because they're not the funniest. So take yourself out of the equation of who's the funniest, who can deliver the joke best. They should get it. That's not who gets it, because those guys aren't getting those gigs. The people that are getting those gigs are funny enough, asterisk next to enough, but they do what they're told. But when in popular art and music and comedy and all creativity, when have the most influential people that you looked up to that's molded your art and your activity, when has it been the people that did what they were told and were safe?
Yeah, I agree with you, but I really see your point though about the Lenos of the world. And I know you got to run, but let me ask you two more. Number one, what do you think of Conan O'Brien as a late night host?
Conan's an interesting guy because after that whole spat with him getting the Tonight Show and then him losing it shortly thereafter, and we can go into the weeds about how and why that happened another time. But the thing is that I'm very conflicted on him Because on the one hand, I didn't like how things went down. He solidified himself as a cult legend by doing his last show there, where he said he didn't want people to be bitter and cynical. He just wanted people to work hard and amazing things would happen. And then they literally play Freebird with Will Ferrell, and that's the end of the Tonight Show with Conan O'Brien. Talk about having the balls to go out there on your final show, and instead of it being melancholy or goodbye Conan, we'll miss you, is to be inspiring and grateful. And what a great message that is, because for young people, because his audience really trended younger, I would say, than the average late night show host. But the reason why I'm conflicted is because while I'm sad for him that things didn't work out that way, I also could tell you that maybe some of that was of his own doing. And I don't mean because he was too risque and young people liked him. I actually mean it the opposite. If you go back and look at Conan, when he was on late night, when it was late night with Conan O'Brien, he was a lot more Conan. If Conan is an adjective, he was a lot more Conan on late night with Conan O'Brien than he was on the Tonight Show. You could tell in the very first episode of the Tonight Show he did, you could tell he was reining it in.
Yeah.
And as soon as I saw that, I thought, oh, this isn't going to go well, because he's in that terrible middle ground where the network's not happy because he's not reining it in enough. And Conan fans aren't happy because they're looking at him saying, who is this man? This isn't the guy that I like. And so he lost everybody. And of course, we need not shed any tears for Conan O'Brien, because he's gone on to be perfectly fine and has had a great career. But when he was on the late night show, he was good. When he got a little bit older and moved up to the Tonight Show, he wasn't as good. And I say that as a guy who I liked him the way he was before. I don't know, if it's one of those things where maybe there's just an evolution to the art form and to the genre and to the space. But then again, I don't think too much about that, because we know that so much of this is dominated by network control, that we don't know what kind of show Conan O'Brien would have done if NBC wasn't telling him what to do. To be fair, we don't know what kind of show Jay Leno would do if Jay Leno wasn't being told what to do. I'm trying to be as generous of my interpretation of that as possible.
The reason I asked is that I never watched his show, never watched anything he did. And I canceled cable in June of 2020. And then I wasn't watching any shows. And then, like I said, I subscribed to some things like your show on YouTube, and YouTube started serving me up some segments. And I thought, boy, I kind of like some of the things I saw from Conan O'Brien. And I never really even gave him a single thought, because maybe just the way he looked, I thought this guy's going to be vanilla, blah, 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 but not at all. And he's a musician, so got to give him a little credit for that. So do you see anything out there that you like now? Is there any hope other than it's too late with Alan Mosley?
That's such a tough question, because even when I was sitting here thinking about your question of just the comedians that are out there, what's so tough is, are there comedians that I have liked? Absolutely. Do I like them now? That's a tougher question. You brought up George Carlin, and I actually tend to think George Carlin is one of the most painfully overrated comedians there ever were.
Really?
Partly because, I believe that partly because there's so many iconic quotes and clips of Carlin that people like to share, specifically in our community, and that's all great. But if I remove myself from that, if I take a wide-angle look at it and say, okay, but how much am I laughing? Or is he telling jokes, or is he just ranting 24/7? And would I think that this was anywhere near as entertaining if I didn't agree with some of his perspectives? And I come back to, no, it's not that funny. He's not being a good comedian. And I compare that to, say, someone like a Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle says things we agree with, but he also says things we don't agree with. But even then, he was funnier before than he is now. Take Louis C.K. Of course, Louis C.K. got in trouble when he had his 15 minutes of fame, and then he had his 15 minutes of scorn and derision because he got in trouble with the wrong. But I've watched his most recent comedy special called Sorry. Since he's come back, he's done a comedy special, and he addresses the controversy a little bit in it, but otherwise he moves on. And you know what, Tom? It's just nowhere near as funny.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart. It really does, because these are some of the guys that I'm like, these are the funniest guys in my era or generation of comedy. And they were good. And I don't know if I would say they're bad now, I don't think anyone in their right mind can look at Dave Chappelle and say, oh, he sucks, don't listen to him. I think that would be disingenuous. But they're not as good. They're not as good when they were making their fortune as they are now protecting their fortune, if that makes sense. And it's just such, and I say that with, it's such a shame. It really is. If I was gonna give one more, I'd say Bill Burr, which is the same boat of, I don't agree with everything Bill Burr says, but we agree with some of it. I think he's still young enough and still hungry enough that he still is willing to push the buttons and say and do things that really challenges people and challenges their positions, and it comes off as humorous. So I think he's pretty good. But on the whole, I really just, if someone was saying, hey, Alan, what should I tune in to watch tonight other than us? I'd say, God, I don't know, because all the people that have the thrones of the official positions of authority on TV or film, God, they just either they suck and they always have, or they were good and are less good, and in some ways that's worse.
Real fast, not to change your mind on George Carlin, but I will say this, and this goes back to what we were talking about when we first came on, which is, I think a lot of the libertarians would play the clips like when he talks about not voting, and that one when he's much older and ranting about how you have owners and all that stuff. When I think of George Carlin, I don't think of that at all. The first thing that comes to my mind when I think of George Carlin is stuff about the airplane. Please check in and around your seat for anything you might have brought on board. I might have brought my Arrowhead collection, but I didn't. Those kinds of things. And the thing with the dog and the cat, or the cat never takes any blame for stuff. That's the kind of thing where I thought George Carlin was great. And he would say, that's what a comedian's job is, to remind you of things you didn't notice the first time around. And then I think you're right. When he goes on those rants, sometimes there's some humor, but there's stretches there where it's like, not a comedy show anymore. So point well taken.
It's a very thin, blurry line, and it's something that I deal with myself. Look, I do my show. NBC's not exactly knocking down my door, and even myself, with every single week that we produce an episode, I'm always poring over my notes and thinking to myself, am I getting too political here? Or am I getting too silly here? Am I trying to say something funny, but it's only funny in my head, and the audience is saying, Jesus, what's the guy talking about? And vice versa. Am I talking about something that's important to me, and the audience is thinking to themselves, Jesus, he was funny 5 minutes ago, now he's preaching. Look, I ask myself those questions all the time. I think it's really hard to do. It's really hard to find that balance. I feel like it's one of those things that when you see it.
No, I totally feel you, because I have no idea either if people are liking what they're hearing. I just look at the downloads, and that's not always even the greatest indication, because you don't know why someone didn't see something or whatever. And it really is weird in a virtual world with no audience. So now you're out here, like you said, you're talking in a room by yourself. You've got a producer in some other state. And whatever you're doing over there, I'm not just telling you because you came on the show, you're doing a good job, because when I watch it, it looks good to me, and I enjoy the show. I recommend everybody check it out. How do they do that? What's the best way to subscribe to your show?
So first of all, I would say we do have it in podcast form. If you don't like to watch things and you like to just binge listen to things while you're working out or on the road, you can do that on your favorite podcasting platform of choice, thanks to Anchor. It's just Anchor FM or anchor.fm/Alan Mosley TV. But you can search It's Too Late with Alan Mosley TV on every platform. You'll find it. And as for video, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Odyssey, Twitch, everything, it's Alan Mosley TV. YouTube, Alan Mosley TV. Facebook, Alan Mosley TV. Twitter, Alan Mosley TV. Odyssey, Alan Mosley TV. That's the easiest way to find it on all platforms, to search It's Too Late with Alan Mosley or Alan Mosley TV. And I'll make one more, because you brought it up a little bit ago. Yes, doing a show like that without a live audience is tough, because you're putting your faith in the screen and in the camera that what you're doing is translating to them and they're enjoying it, and you don't really know until after the fact. But once a year, since basically year one, we've done one live annual. We did one at episode 50, one at 100, and one at 150, where we had a live audience, live music, and it's exhilarating. I can definitely see how people get addicted to that sort of thing, but I can also tell you, having put in the work to do a show like that, how these guys do it 5 nights a week is beyond me. Of course, I know what the answer is they have 100 people doing it with them, whereas with us, it's just me, or just me and Dave. And this year, it's June 4th. The 4th annual It's Too Late live show is June 4th here in Middle Tennessee.
All right, I'll look forward to that. Everybody else, check out this show. I can't say enough about it. You're going to be surprised how well done it is, how well produced, and the on-air talent who was good enough to join me today. Alan, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you, Tom.
The war of ideas has only just begun. Arm yourself with the knowledge you need by heading to TomMullenTalksFreedom.com and subscribing to our email list. And remember, every revolution starts in the minds of the people.